The Genesis THOR 401 RGB is a gaming keyboard that has a unique design, pale brown switches and a detachable wrist rest. It also has RGB LEDs beneath all the keys and a dial to control not only the system volume but the RGB illumination as well. And all this for under $85 or euros. However, given the highly competitive market for gaming keyboards, can this keyboard live up to the expectation? And that we shall see in this review. The THOR 401 RGB is a full layout QWERTY keyboard that sports a few interesting features and looks to be a good choice for gamers. That's mostly thanks to its design that is somewhere in between gaming and office. From a pricing perspective, you can get this keyboard for roughly $85 or euros. I'm saying roughly as I've seen this keyboard go for higher or lower, so you must shop around for the best price. Even so, you do get a lot for your money. Pale brown switches, a full layout, a dial for the RGB LEDs and system volume, and a wrist rest, among other things. The design of the THOR 401 RGB is interesting to say the least, as the keyboard uses half-size keycaps on all switches and clear body switches that enhance the RGB LED installed on their underside. The surface of the keyboard is smooth with a satin finish. This surface is made from metal with a plastic body on the underside. There are subtle design elements that are part of the Genesis design language, things such as the actual Genesis logo and name, which are painted on the space between the arrow keys and the upper section keys. In this section we have the numlock and caps lock LED indicators, which is odd but a welcome feature. Basically, to fit the audio RGB LED knob and media keys on the upper right part of the keyboard, the status LEDs were moved next to the arrow keys. A lot of other brands would have just removed the status LEDs altogether, but the THOR 401 RGB still has them only in a different position. This is a welcome feature, as I've said before, as you get the best of both worlds. The dial installed at the top of the keyboard is interesting. It's not just a system volume dial as you'd expect, as you can also control the RGB LEDs of the keyboard. To switch between the two functions, all you need to do is push on the dial for a few seconds and the lights will flicker, signaling that you switched modes. However, there is one drawback of this dial, which is the RGB LEDs that are installed underneath it, which do not change their color with the rest of the keyboard. This can be an issue if you want to have your entire keyboard in the same color. While I understand why they did this, as the different colors make the knob easy to see and use, it does break the uniform design of the keyboard, especially at night. The buttons next to the volume knob are the main media keys, which have the forwards, backwards and your pause function. Instead of blending those functions into the rest of the keyboard as many manufacturers do these days, Genesis opted to use different round buttons for these functions and thus make them convenient and easy to use. The keycaps are interesting if we talk about the design. They are small with only half of the usual height of the keycaps. Unfortunately, these are made from ABS plastic, which has one simple drawback. In time, the surface of this plastic will become glossy and have this oily feel to it. It's not a deal breaker by any means, as ABS keycaps have been widely used before and still today, but it's something to keep in mind, especially since PBT plastic keycaps are available with other keyboards. PBT plastic being harder to wear down and will not get the glossy finish of the ABS that we all hate. Behind the keycaps we have the mechanical switches. With this keyboard, Genesis opted for the pale brown switches, a popular mechanical switch that has an operating force of 45 grams and a travel distance of 3.6 millimeters. The benefit of these switches is the lower than average noise output, especially when compared to blue mechanical switches. The included wrist rest is good and it is attached to the keyboard with the help of a few magnets, so in essence the wrist rest is not actually attached to the keyboard as much as it's sticking to it on the side. The magnetic system is a good one as it takes the guesswork out of the equation, but it's not the strongest thing in the world. Unfortunately, as good as this wrist rest looks like, it is made from solid plastic and has absolutely no padding at all, and for many users this will be a drawback, especially if you are using the keyboard for long periods of time. The cable of the THOR 401 RGB is simple. It has a length of 160 cm and is covered by sleeving. It's not as flexible as it could have been though, and that's mainly thanks to the sleeving that is on the thicker side. Outside of this, there isn't much to say. It's a cable with a USB Type-A connector at the end and that's about it. The underside of this keyboard has an interesting striped pattern applied on the entire surface. This pattern has a glossy finish on the lower part and matches well with the rest of the keyboard. The feet used on the THOR 401 RGB are made from rubber, at least those that are installed on the front side, as the back ones are solid plastic for some reason. No fear though, as these retractable feet do have some rubber pads on them. The RGB LEDs used with this keyboard are good and are installed on each mechanical switch. These can either use the pre-installed profile of the keyboards or be controlled through the software of the keyboard. They are bright enough during the day and good to look at during the night. The transparent body of the switches will enhance the look of these LEDs, as the body will act as a diffuser for the light and color. The disassembling process with this keyboard is simple, as you only need to remove 13 Phillips screws from the top aluminum plate and the entire thing just lifts off the back casing. With the said casing removed, we get a glimpse of what makes this keyboard work, and we can see that the cable can be removed and replaced if damaged, as it uses a socket with a connector system. The big chip you see here is the RGB controller with a simple model number BYK816. This controller has been widely used on budget RGB keyboards, and it is surprising to see it here on an $80 or euros keyboard, but it works well enough, so I will give it a pass. The soldering quality on the PCB is good, but I have seen much better in cheaper keyboards, and thus this needs to be addressed in future models. The software used with the THOR 401 RGB is simple. That's the way to put it. There is nothing going on here other than a few buttons and a sub-menu, and honestly, I like it this way. The software, while simple looking, works, and that's what it needs to do. You get two sliders for controlling the RGB LEDs and a drop-down menu for selecting the lighting mode. You can access the macro editor or simply click on any key to edit its functionality. With this software, you can also edit the pre-installed profiles, which is always a good thing to have. When testing this keyboard, I did not encounter anything out of the ordinary. The slim keycaps do need some adjustment time, especially if you have never used such a keyboard, but the adapting period is small, under half an hour or so. So don't worry about it. In terms of ergonomics, this keyboard is on the same level as many gaming keyboards, as it has a fairly standard layout and you get used to it immediately. If there are drawbacks here, it has to be the rather hard surface of the wrist rest, which might become an issue for some users. All this being said, the Genesis THOR 401 RGB is a good keyboard that has some interesting and useful features while it lacks others. For starters, the dial on the upper right corner is useful, as you can not only control the system volume but also the RGB LEDs. The round buttons for the media keys are a welcome feature as well, as they are different shape and thus easy to identify in the dark. Even with these media buttons present, the Stylus LEDs have their own place right next to the arrow keys, a thing which not many keyboards have these days. However, while this keyboard has plenty of good features, and in general it is a good keyboard, it also lacks some features that have started to become the norm. For starters, the cable is not removable unless you want to take apart the whole keyboard. Some gaming keyboards use a USB Type-C removable cable, which is great. Not here though. In addition, the underside of this keyboard has no channel to route the cable to one side of the keyboard and thus help with the cable clutter on your desk. However, if there's something to truly complain about, is the lack of availability. Right now, only certain parts of Europe stock this keyboard, and that is unfortunate, as the Genesis THOR 401 RGB is a good gaming keyboard that has a unique design, and even though it lacks certain creature comfort features, it is a good keyboard overall. If Genesis can work out a way to make this keyboard available for more people, I'm sure that a lot of people will find this model to be to their liking. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the Subscriber Star pages of this channel.